Child is Born, A Beginner's Guide to Nativity Stories by Amy Jill Levine. This is Chapter 4, Jesus, Heir to Traditions, pages 99 through 106. Naming by an Angel. Mrs. Manoah named Samson, and Hannah named Samuel. Connections between Mary and Hagar, as well as Sarah and Hagar, continue in terms of an angel proclaiming what their sons are to be named. The angel told Hagar that she would bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction. Genesis 16, chapter 11. In the next chapter, God assures Abraham, your wife Sarah shall bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac. Genesis 17, verse 19. God then explains, I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. In Matthew chapter 1, verse 21, the angel tells Joseph that Mary will bear a son, and you are to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. The name Jesus in Hebrew comes from a root that means salvation. Similarly, in Luke chapter 1, verse 31, Gabriel tells Mary that she will bear a son, whom she is to name Jesus. When we put the namings of Isaac and Ishmael into conversation with the naming of Jesus, more insights emerge. For example, while Genesis 22, Abraham's near sacrifice of Isaac, is often seen as the prototype of the crucifixion of Jesus, connections of Jesus to Isaac are more substantial. Not only is Jesus a direct descendant of Isaac, Matthew chapter 1, verse 2, Jesus also shares in the implications of Isaac's name, which comes from the Hebrew for laughter. While the Gospels record that Jesus wept, John chapter 11, verse 35, I think he also laughed a lot. He would have laughed with friends at meals. He would have laughed at the humor of many of his parables. And he would have laughed when Mary smiled at him, or Joseph tickled him, or the Magi made funny faces at him. Births are, if everything goes right, occasions for laughter and celebration. Jesus is also connected to the naming of Ishmael and the predictions the angel gives to Hagar. The name Ishmael contains the Hebrew Shema, hear or listen up, or pay attention. When Jesus tells the scribe in Mark 12:29 that the greatest commandment begins, hear, Shema, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, we hear an echo of Ishmael's name. More, the angel tells Hagar in Genesis chapter 16, verse 11, that the Lord has given heed, Shema, better heard in the sense of paid attention to your affliction. The term for affliction, Hebrew ani, as we have seen, not only marks many of Israel's laws, which mandate care for the socially vulnerable, the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the non-native born. It also has resonances with both Mary and Jesus. The Hebrew term ani, affliction, in Genesis 16:11, comes into Greek as tapanoisis. Here are a few echoes. For example, Mary exalts in the NRSVUE, for God has looked with favor on the lowly state of his servant, Luke chapter 1, verse 48. The Greek reads, the oppression, tapanoisis, of his female slave. Tapanoisis appears again in Acts 8:33, where it describes Jesus as Isaiah's suffering servant. In his tapanoisis, his misery, his oppression, the NRSVU reads humiliation, justice was denied him. James chapter 1, verse 10, using the same word, describes how the wealthy will be humiliated. NRSVUE, humbled, by disappearing like a flower in the field. The connection reminds us that to be humiliated, a public act, is a form of oppression. It is designed to create shame. It is designed not to give rise to pity, but to beget rejection. The Romans stripped their victims and crucified them naked in order to humiliate them. Hagar is the first person the Bible describes as ani, afflicted, oppressed, humiliated. She will not be the last, nor, however, is affliction our final state. Paul writes, he will transform the body of our humiliation, or humble body, tapanoiseos, that it may be conformed to the body of his glory, or glorious body, by the power that also enables him to make all things subject to himself. Philippians chapter 3, verse 21. Our bodies can be oppressed and humiliated. Some have been slapped or beaten. Some have been humiliated or shamed. That will all stop. As for Ishmael, He is the first about whom the prediction comes that everyone's hand will be against him. Genesis chapter 16, verse 12. He will not be the only one. The same expression of the hand against occurs in Matthew 26, verse 50 at Gethsemane, when then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. Jesus knows it is like to be opposed by all, betrayed by all. Ishmael will live at odds with all his kin, Genesis chapter 16, verse 12, as Jesus will be rejected by his hometown, Jerusalem, even according to Mark, his followers. But in all cases, God hears. Ishmael, Isaac, and Jesus are not the only children named by an angel. According to Luke chapter 1, verse 13, the angel Gabriel tells the elderly priest Zechariah that his equally elderly wife Elizabeth will give birth to a child, who is to be named John. The Hebrew name Yachanan means God. The Yo is in Hebrew Yo, and it is an abbreviation for Yahweh, which is the sacred name of God. Chanaan in Hebrew means grace, so the name angelicized to John means God is gracious. But you already knew that because you've already met Hannah, Chenna, whose name means grace. According to 1 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 9, in part of David's discussion with his son Solomon about the temple and about Solomon's reign, David explains that God revealed to him, "A son shall be born to you. He shall be a man of rest. I will give him rest from all his enemies on every side. Indeed, his name shall be Solomon, and I will give peace," Hebrew shalom. The word has the same letters as the name Solomon, and quiet to Israel in his days. When I think about peace and quiet, I think about the TV being turned off and the dog sleeping rather than barking. But peace and quiet here means that there is no sound of battle, no swords, no fear, no crying and pain. Solomon, too, according to Matthew, is an ancestor of Jesus, Matthew chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. He does not appear in Luke's genealogy, and so Jesus is also an inheritor of this concern for peace and quiet. They shall name him Emmanuel. Matthew chapter 1, verse 23 offers a different name via the Greek translation of Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. They shall name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Here, the name is not mandated by the angel. It functions instead as a title, a way the evangelist suggests the gospel audience should think about Jesus. The notion of God as being with us bookends the gospel, first in the nativity account and again in Matthew's last verse of the gospel where Jesus assures his disciples, "I am with you always," Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. The Gospel of Mark, in its earliest versions, ends at 16:8, with 3 women fleeing in fear and silence from the empty tomb. Luke's Gospel ends with the ascension of the resurrected Jesus into heaven and the disciples heading back to Jerusalem to wait for the Holy Spirit to descend. In John 20, the 4th Gospel's original ending, as well as John chapter 21, the appendix to the text, Jesus remains present with his disciples, but the Gospel stresses that Jesus will not be with them always. In 1 John chapter 13, verse 33, he tells them, "Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so I now say to you, where I am going, you cannot come." The Johannine Jesus will return to his Father, but he will not leave the disciples without divine presence. He tells them, "I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you forever." John chapter 14, verse 16. The Greek behind advocate is parakletos. It means one who stands beside or stands next to. Para is the same term in parable, paramedic, or paralegal. Kletos comes from the verb kaleo, which means to call or to invite. Other translations include comforter and defense attorney. John 14, verse 26 identifies this paraclete with the Holy Spirit. To summarize, only Matthew stresses the permanent presence of Jesus, and Matthew signals his teaching with the name Emmanuel. Mystics will sometimes talk about a presence absent, or an absent present. Jesus is permanently here, but not in the way he was with the disciples who were at the supper at Emmaus in Luke 24, or the ones at the shore for breakfast in John chapter 21. I remember hearing years ago the footprints in the sand story. A dreamer walks along the beach with God and reflects over her life. She asks God why God was not there when God was most needed, the times when the sand showed only one set of footprints. God replies, "Do you see those single sets of footprints? Those are the times when I carried you." We see the same present absence at the cross when Jesus cries, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew chapter 27, verse 46, and Mark 15, verse 34. Jesus is not forsaken, for God is present in the darkness at noon. The tearing of the temple veil is a sign of God in mourning. Names are markers that both reveal and conceal our identities. They are also mutable. Names can be changed, most commonly through marriage. My last name, Levine, is the name on my birth certificate. A few of my husband's relatives early on presumed I had taken my husband's name in marriage, and so called me Amy Geller. Since I had no clue who Amy Geller was, both I and they were initially very confused. Others have changed their names for professional reasons. Bob Dylan was Robert Allen Zimmerman. Ralph Lauren was Ralph Lifshitz. Kirk Douglas was Ishur Danielovich Dembski. Tony Curtis was Bernard Herschel Schwartz, and Hedy Lamarr started life as Hedwig Ava Maria Kiesler. Nicknames replace given names, second names replace first names, and how we introduce ourselves necessarily says something about our identity. Naming can also burden us or inspire us. To be called Ishmael, God hears, means that self-identification is bound up with identity. Ishmael knew that God had heard his desperate, pregnant mother fleeing abuse. Ishmael knows that God listens, and Jesus, whose name connotes salvation, heard his commission every time his parents called to him. One more of many connections related to the concern for hearing, the importance of the spoken word. Most people in antiquity were illiterate, and stories were passed through the generations not on papyrus or parchment, but on the tongue. The focus on hearing and on the word opens with Genesis, where God speaks the universe into being. And God said, "Be light." Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. The call to fidelity in Deuteronomy is not "See, Israel," or "Read, Israel," but "Hear, Israel," "Listen, Israel." Ishmael's name means God hears. In Luke chapter 1, verse 45, Mary's cousin Elizabeth exclaims, "Blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her from the Lord." Even Paul, whose letters would have been read aloud to the Gentile congregations in Corinth, in Philippi, Thessalonica, and Galatia, wrote to the Romans, "Faith comes from what is heard, and what is heard comes through the word of Christ." Romans chapter 10, verse 17. We can do even more. Early Christian theologians, wondering how conception by the Holy Spirit worked, the biology is above my pay grade, suggested that Mary conceived through her ear when she heard the angel's word. The technical term for this is conception per arium. The idea may be based on Psalm 45, verse 10. Here, same word root as Shema, O daughter, consider and incline your ear, which strikes me as a stretch, but it is consistent with the allegorical readings favored in the pre-Reformation era.